We're live in Washington with Joanna Leblanc. She is an adjunct professor of American policy. She'll throw more light on these new restrictions that we saw coming. Good to have you this weekend, Joanna. Now, let's talk about the rationale behind the ban. How does the Trump administration justify the travel ban on Nigeria? They cited security concerns and vetting difficulties while also exempting countries like Saudi Arabia. I'm mentioning Saudi because a lot have insinuated that they use Nigerians to get U.S. visas or U.S. passports. Yeah.
Well, I think it's important. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me on. I think it's important to note that the United States government is within its rights to impose policies, in this case, immigration policies that will protect its borders. But I think it's also important that the United States find some kind of balance so that it does not put in place policies that will have a broad impact on specific groups. And in this case, what we're seeing is most of the countries that are impacted by the travel ban are particularly countries from the global South. But listen here, the unfortunate reality is that the Supreme Court in 2020 sort of set the groundwork for this to happen, because in Trump versus Hawaii, the Supreme Court made it very clear that the President of the United States has broad authority to impose whatever immigration policy it deems necessary to protect the United States' national security interest.
Now let's talk about the effectiveness of the ban. First off, do you believe the travel ban is an effective tool for addressing terrorism and, national security threats, or is it some people think is a form of collective punishment? But I know we've talked about several times the Trump administration has said America first. I'm asking this question because he's, talked about Nigeria tackling its, insecurity problems. Is this the best way to handle it if he's trying to be, the person of the world?
Well, if you look at the proclamation, it specifically states that one of the reasons why Nigeria is on this list is because of lack of intelligence sharing. But the good thing about this administration is that it is one that is very innovative, meaning the Trump administration. It is one that is very creative, and it is one that uses every single opportunity as a means to negotiate with countries. So I think that if the Tinubu administration come to the table and have a conversation with the administration around this issue, I think that we will see a reverse. In fact, there were a number of countries earlier in the year that were placed on this list and that were ultimately removed because they had reached some form of consensus with the United States. So it's not the final decision. The good thing is, again, this administration is rather transactional. So I think there's opportunities for the Tinubu administration to certainly work with DHS and definitely the State Department to get this policy reversed. However, if there is not a consensus, if there is not some kind of resolution reached, I can foresee that this expanding into not just a partial, but into a full ban.
Now, let's look at the time frame. We have January 2026 when it will start. But while that is still in place and while negotiations might be ongoing, let's talk about diplomacy and international relations. Impact on the U.S.-Nigeria relations, that's what I mean. How does the travel ban affect diplomatic efforts to strengthen U.S.-Nigeria relations and promote, regional stability in West Africa?
Well, Nigeria is not just another country. Nigeria is a strategic partner to the United States in fighting counterterrorism in the Sahel region, and certainly through ECOWAS and so forth. So I think that this partial ban has further impacted the relationship between the United States and Nigeria. And before that, you had Nigeria being named a country of particular concern, right? In the United States, President Trump announced that he will come to Nigeria. He will send troops to Nigeria, gun ablazing, right? And there is this a notion of a genocide of Christians in Nigeria. So the relationship was already not in the best position. I think that further impact the relationship between the two countries, but also too, from an economic standpoint, you have countless, well, many Nigerian students who have been admitted into universities here in the U.S. to study, and now universities will have to kind of determine the best way forward. Some schools have notified students that they will be attending university remote until this issue is rectified and sorted out.
What message do you think the travel ban, talking about the global implications now, what message do you think the travel ban sends to other African countries about the U.S. commitment to partnership and cooperation? There are other, people who are, or other countries who are on that list.
Absolutely. Most of the countries on the list are from the global south, and a number of those countries are countries across the African continent. I don't think it is a good message that the United States is sending to the African continent. I mean, you're talking about a continent of 1.4 billion people, where the average age is 19. The continent that feeds the rest of the world, the continent that has vast critical minerals that the United States actually needs in order to counter China and some of its other adversaries. So I think that the message that the U.S. is sending to these African nations is essentially diversify your economic and diplomatic partners. And I think that if the United States is interested in maintaining its role as a superpower, we must, as a country, we must reassess and revisit some of these policies that will have adverse impact on the relationship with these countries, but most importantly, that will have an adverse impact on some of these countries' economies. When you start imposing some of these bans, and we start labeling these countries of countries of particular concerns, what it says to U.S. Partners of Nigeria, partners of African countries, is that these are problematic countries and you should reconsider your engagement with them. So I think that we need to find a fine balance on how to engage with the most important continent in the world.
Let's look at discrimination and fairness. Do you think the travel ban disproportionately affects certain groups, such as, Nigerian Christians or students? And if so, how will the administration address these concerns? You know that some, like you said, a number of students are over there. We're talking about Christians. At some point, some Christians were, applauding the fact that, the Trump administration is really concerned about Christians, and then having this along is sort of, just opposing it. Seems like, we thought he had concerns for the country, and then we have this, coming in. So,
Well, I think most of the policies coming out of Washington, in particular around immigration, should not be news to none of us, right? President Donald Trump ran a campaign on fixing America's broken system. And let's be honest, America's immigration system is indeed broken. There are a number of measures that the United States must take to restructure and to re-strengthen our immigration system. Make no mistake about that. However, when you have sweeping policies that impact an entire group of people, particularly from the global south, it certainly raises questions about its true intent, right? And when you talk about the Christian genocide that the president of the United States has indicated exist in Nigeria, under normal circumstances, whenever certain groups within countries are being discriminated against, or are being persecuted, or are being killed, the next step that the United States will take is allow them a pathway to come into the United States as refugees. And we saw that here in South Africa, the United States indicated that there is a white genocide against white South Africaners. So therefore, the United States has put in place a refugee program to admit them into the United States, but we're not seeing the same thing happening to Christians that the President of the United States indicates that are being targeted and being discriminated against and are being killed in Nigeria due to their faith. So I think it raises a lot of concerns, and I think it should cause a lot of people to really think and really assess and process some of these policies to really understand what's the real motive behind some of these policies. But certainly the United States is within its rights to protect its borders, and the Supreme Court in Trump versus Hawaii set the foundation for the United States president to impose some of these sort of immigration policies.
So finally, before I let you go, let's look at the strategic consequences. How might the travel ban influence Nigeria's relationship with other global powers? We know about China, Russia. And then what are the strategic implications for the U.S.?
Again, I think that these types of policies further pushes America's partners closer to America's adversaries, which is what the United States probably does not want to happen, right? It's the opposite of what the US would like to see happen. But in reality, when countries are having a difficulty with negotiating and when policies are impacting their population, we're talking about broad-based policies. And even though in this case with Nigeria, you're talking about less than 5% of Nigerians will ever apply for a U.S. visa to come to the United States. But nonetheless, it still is a broad-based a policy that impact virtually anyone who wishes to apply for a visa, unless you are, of course, a politician or a member of the Tinubu administration, and so on. So I think that this policy will have a huge impact on the relationship between the two nations. But because, again, like I said earlier, you're talking about an administration that is very transactional. Right. There is room for the Tinubu administration to have a discussion with the Trump administration, but most importantly, to address some of the issues that were discussed in the proclamation, right? For example, sharing biometric information with the United States, making sure that your visa issuing process is one that is consistent with international standards, right? Because again, the national security interest of this nation is the foremost, is incredibly important to this country, because what you don't want is another 9/11 on your hand, right? So.
Right. Thank you so much for that. At least you said there's an open window there for negotiation, being that Trump is a transactional leader. Joanna Leblanc is an adjunct professor of American foreign policy from Howard University. Thank you for the time. Now, the United States has imposed partial travel restrictions on Antigua and Barbuda effective January 1, 2026, citing concerns over its citizenship by investment program. The restrictions affect tourists, business, and student visas, but existing visa holders are exempt.